Hello everybody. In today's video, we're going to do something a little bit different than you may be used to, and that is actually an interview with composer, sound designer, programmer, and all-around amazing guy, Brian Schmidt. So Brian Schmidt has been a composer, sound designer, and programmer in the game industry for decades, and there aren't many people like him working in the game audio industry. Because our field is so young, he actually has more experience than a lot of other people in this field. He's been around it since the pinball era. So if you've been playing pinball games, the classic pinball games, the odds are that you've actually heard his sound design and music work on pinball games, SNES and Genesis games, all the way to modern games. And he's also working to this day. So he's never stopped, which is amazing. So he has tons of experience, which is absolutely fantastic, and we can take a lot away. So on top of just being a great guy, composer, sound designer, programmer, he's also a teacher and runs a conference called Game Sound Con in LA every single year. And this year it takes place on October 9th and 10th, 2018. And every single year people go down from the game audio field, whether they're a beginner or advanced or somewhere in between, and learn more about how to work in the game industry. So it could be things on skills like wise or sound design or composition, all the way to business and networking and all that sort of stuff. And you also get to meet your peers down there as well. I was a speaker at Game SoundCon last year and had an absolutely fantastic time. So we're going to talk about Game SoundCon, how he got started in the game industry, what advice he actually has for you if you're getting started in the game industry, and what he's been seeing and what's been shifting in the game industry over his decades of work. So on top of doing the interview, you can of course sign up for my newsletter in the top right corner, just so you can get access to my free ebook that teaches you how to work in the game industry, how to charge for your services, as well as 2 new free online courses that teach you how to work in the game industry, how to network, how to make the most of conferences like Game SoundCon or whatever events are in your general area. And if you like this interview or if you want more content like this, please comment down below. I read every single comment, so I know to do more stuff like this. So without further ado, let's get into the interview with Brian. Let's get started. Thank you so much, Brian, for joining me today. I'm really excited to have you, and it'll be really good to talk to you because I know a little bit about your background, but I'll actually discover quite a bit more about it here. So that's actually exciting for me too. But why don't you give us a little bit of background on you before we get diving into the questions?
Okay, the Reader's Digest version. I've been working in game audio for about 31 years. It's the only thing I've ever done professionally. I went to school at Northwestern University, thought I was going to be a tuba major, ended up in music technology, started at a pinball company, a giant pinball fan. I'll beat any of your listeners or viewers in pinball. That's just something I did as a kid growing up all the time.
Amazing.
And that's actually an interesting lesson for people wanting to get into the industry. One of the reasons it turns out I got the job at the pinball company when I interviewed for it was that I was a really good pinball player.
Oh, that's amazing.
And you learn that people in games want to hire people that love the products that they're working on.
100% true.
Oh, I didn't appreciate it at the time. But so I worked there for a couple of years. I learned a ton. Working on pinball machines like Black Knight 2000, Space Station, Banzai Run, the video game Narc with Eugene Jarvis and George Petro and Ed Boon. And then I went freelance for about 10 years. I did a lot of games for EA, Namco. I did Madden for several years, Mutant Football League, Desert Strike, Jungle Strike. Then I changed gears and was at Microsoft for about 10 years, most of which was heading up audio for the Xbox program. My claim to fame there is I did the startup sound for the first Xbox. That was fun. After 10 years of Microsoft, decided that was enough Microsoft and went back to being a freelancer again, which I've been doing about for the past 10 years.
Awesome. And you also run Game SoundCon, which is an awesome video game sound conference, which we're going to dive into. But before we
I started.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I started Game SoundCon in 2009, about a year after out of Microsoft. When I was at Xbox, a colleague of mine and me, Scott Selfon, actually, and Chanel Summers as well, we'd kind of fly around the world educating people about how to make sound for the Xbox. And at that time, because of a couple of technological changes, we were starting to see film and TV composers start to come into the video game industry. And I was seeing a lot of them trip over the same kinds of creative challenges they're not used to, technical limitations they've never seen, and even some of the business issues about how games, the business side of video games, were. And they were all making these same mistakes or coming in with these same misconceptions. So when I left Microsoft, I thought, hey, it would be kind of cool to start up a conference dedicated towards people who maybe were very fluent in music and sound recording or sound design, but didn't know about games. And that was the original Game Sound Con. I think the first one I had about 45 people in attendance, and it was specifically geared towards that crowd. You don't know games, but you know music or sound design.
Yeah.
And sort of, force feed them with a fire hose the business, technical, and creative challenges that we have in games that I was seeing as I was at Microsoft.
That's awesome. Yeah. So as you kind of like built this conference, it seems to have grown to something much, much bigger, which is great. But before we dive into like all the stuff that you're doing right now, I'm actually really curious about those pinball days, because I actually grew up, I didn't know this until I did a whole bunch of research on you, playing most of the things you made, like when I was a little, like when I was a little kid. So like everything on your list, I was like, oh yeah, I played that. Oh my God. Even like Mutant League and all that sort of stuff. So when you were working on all those like pinball games or even the older games, you didn't have Fmod, you didn't have Wise, you didn't have all the technology that we have to make it so easy. So I'm wondering how you actually created and then even implemented sound on things like hardware like pinball, or even older games for like Genesis and Super Nintendo, things like that.
Yeah, it really required a sort of combination of what at the time was a very unusual combination of skill sets. I just saw recently an article floating around on Facebook or something about how people can be successful not necessarily by being the top 0.1% of their field, but maybe being in the top 15 to 20% of multiple fields at the same time and synthesizing that into a unique thing that you can deliver. At the time, when I got started in pinball, I had just finished, I decided to got a music degree originally. And then I got so involved in the music tech side that I actually decided to get a second bachelor's degree in computer science.
Nice.
And then I was actually getting my master's degree in computer applications of music when I heard word about the pinball machine opening. And at the time, Williams needed somebody who could write music and also program assembly language. So it was a very technical way of creating sounds. Like you said, there was no Fmod, there was no Wise. There was not even a DAW. You couldn't go into a studio and record music. You had to create all the scores from all those pinball machines you probably played when you were a kid,
right,
or the Sega Genesis or Nintendo games. All the music is synthesized in real time on these little tiny synthesizer chips. And the skill set of being able to do something that sounds pretty good with those little tiny synthesizer chips, because there were no tools at all, you either had to get somebody to write a primitive tool for you, or in my case, I had my own set of tools I wrote from scratch. And that became that was sort of my secret sauce, is I could do the music, but I could also do the very technological stuff. And it was a very different skill set than there is today.
Absolutely. And you seem to kind of be a living example of that, like 15% kind of from multiple fields, and then you have this kind of cool crossroads of what you're doing. So when you were kind of working on all that stuff, and as you kind of started to transition out of that and making your own audio company, at that time, I can't imagine that was a common thing, to make your own audio company, to work as maybe a freelancer or as a contractor in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
So what made you do that? How'd you start that?
I wonder myself that, because I worked at Williams for about 2.5 years, and I loved that job to death. A colleague of mine, Dan Forden, who was there when I was there, is still there, or is that it's now NetherRealm Studios. They do Mortal Kombat, and I'm sure I would have been very happy if I had stayed there and been there for the last 30 years. But I don't know, it was something gave me this sort of independence. I got a little bit of, oh, this is cool over here. And it would be kind of fun to work on home games, not just arcade games, which was what I was doing at the time. So I quit and went freelance at the time when probably it might even be true that maybe there were a half dozen game audio freelancers.
Amazing.
At the time, almost all video game companies had in-house employees that did all this stuff. And I think it's because of, it was a very, very specialized niche thing. And so they'd hire somebody in, and it took a long time to do music for these systems because you couldn't use a DAW. First of all, DAWs didn't exist back then. This was pre-Pro Tools.
I can't imagine that world.
Yeah, it was a fun world. It's people say, "Oh, how could you do music like that?" It's like, I don't know. I've heard a lot of really great string quartets, and that's only 4 voices, right?
True.
So in some ways, having the technological handcuffs on you it's nice in that it gives you this constrained box within which you have to work, and it can be. This sounds Orwellian, but it can be very liberating to be so constrained.
Yeah. You at least have some direction to work with and can go with it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you got to learn pretty well, too. It's like, what does the Genesis chip sound good at? What does it sound terrible at? Right. If you try to do, and I tried this once to do a, John Williams-esque, strings and brass, and it just sounds so bad to try and do. So just don't do that.
Right. Now you never do that.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, no, I'm not going to, don't try and do Indiana Jones or orchestral on an FM chip. It just won't work. But do something that, I think Brad Fuller, rest his soul, did it brilliantly with the first FM synthesis arcade game, which was Marble Madness. He just found that sweet spot of what that chip could sound good at and wrote a great score.
That's awesome. That's really cool. So because back then it was so specialized, and you've kind of seen the growth of the game audio industry over the course of many years, what have you seen change in the game audio world? Are things becoming more specialized? Are people encouraged to be more generalists? What do you kind of see becoming more and more common?
Wow. There's so many things that have changed. Mostly due to technological. There's so many things that have changed, mostly due to technological changes. The very, very big one was probably 2000, 2001, and that was the PlayStation 2 and the original Xbox. That was when games shipped on DVDs for the first time. And that was really the first time games could move completely away from synthesized chip music, right? Where you're trying to use a synthesizer chip to make music. And instead you can just go and record the London Philharmonic at Abbey Road if you want. That was purely because of how much data can a DVD hold. Compact disc turned out wasn't really enough to hold a lot of music. People filled it up with other stuff. Did an early PlayStation game that had 3,000 lines of dialogue. So 9/10 of the disc was just dialogue, which meant the music had to be synthesized. But DVD changed that. So that was when that happened. That's when you started seeing composers from other industries start to come into games. So that was sort of the beginning of some specialization, especially at the high-end titles, where you'd have a larger audio team, a dedicated composer, dedicated sound designers. The games themselves got bigger because, again, the game disc can hold a lot more. The other big shift was 2008, 2009. And you can actually see this shift in the Bureau of Labor Statistics data. I did a report that's on the Game SoundCon website that looks at, I read a USA Today article about 4 or 5 years ago, and the article was one of the top 10 growing fields is music composer. And I'm like, what? They traced it over a decade. They looked at the endpoints. And I went into the BLS data that they did for the study, and I dove a little bit deeper and did a year-by-year analysis. And there's sort of steady growth. And in 2008, it's like a hockey stick. It just goes up.
Interesting.
Over a period of a couple of years. And that coincides with a couple things, the biggest of which I think is that's when Apple opened the App Store. And that's when Facebook opened their platform to third-party developers. The majority of the early ones were game developers. And that was the intro of self-published video games and indie games. Prior to 2008, there were maybe 400 or 500 video games made a year, always by a major studio because it was a big investment. You had to, the first Sony PlayStation dev kit that I bought was $18,000 to let me be able to play video games in my studio that I was working on. So it was a pretty high barrier to entry, and there weren't very many games out. Well, they're all by major publishers. I read a stat that in 2015, 500 new games were being added to the App Store every single day. And so all of these apps that are being made, all these games that are being made, a good number of them have original music on them for composers. Now, a lot of them are little indie projects and things like that, or hobbyists, but a decent number of them, as you know, are semi-serious, small, teams of 15 or 20 people make them, or a dozen people. And they're serious games, some of which have real budgets.
Right. And
so there was a giant increase. And that sort of goes back to now being the generalist, somebody who works on a game. I just finished up a game called Mutant Football League, which actually hits the store shelves in about 2 weeks.
Nice.
And I was the audio person, right? So I did the music, I did the sound design. Nice. I'm also a music supervisor because I licensed in some indie bands. But so for those kinds of games, you get the specialist, so the generalist, who is the sort of one-stop shop. But for the larger games, you now have specialization where you'll have a music supervisor, a dialogue supervisor, a dialogue caster, and so on. So it's kind of been those bifurcating changes, which has been nice to see the industry go in both directions, not just up, but also sort of down.
Yeah, that's something I actually noticed when I went to Game SoundCon last year, is that there were so many people in fields. I'm like, oh, I never even thought of that. Like, oh, you work on casino games. Cool. There's so many like niche sub-niches that I never even thought would exist. That was just so fascinating. So you get to reach out to all those sorts of people at this conference. So
there's a lot of casino games that are made. A lot of slot machines get made every year.
Yeah, I never even thought about that. But now I know because I went to the event. So now that you've been running this event for a little while, what are you seeing, or what sorts of advice do you give to people who are like new to the industry and want to start breaking in now that you've seen all these new niches and all these new opportunities open up?
It kind of depends who they are. And getting back to that article about the top 0.1%, right? I like to say, if you're a composer and say you want to do games, if you can go into a room in Los Angeles with the 1,000 best composers in LA, and you can look around and you can say confidently and with honest assessment, I'm in the top 10 to 20 or 30 of those people, then just focus on music, focus on composition. That'll take care of itself. Mm-hmm. If that's not you, then if you want to work in games, broadening your skill set can make you a lot more valuable in the game industry. I've been doing research for a report looking at all of the video game job postings in the last about 9 months.
Nice.
And these are game companies posting job listings, for full-time jobs in the game audio industry. And more of them, about 60 to 70%, are listing some fairly highly technical skills, including scripting or C# or integration skills. And so if you can bring those skills as well as your composition and your sound design skills, that can make you much more attractive in this industry, certainly to a wider variety of video game developers that are out there. Again, you can be that one-stop shop.
Right. And that's more attractive to pretty much any client that you'd run into.
Yeah, it might very much more attractive. And it's also nice in that it makes you a much more essential part of the team. Right? If all you're doing is writing some music, recording it, and putting it on an FTP site or a Dropbox, and saying, here's the wave files. I don't know how that goes in the game, but you just here's the music. You're one of the most replaceable pieces on that team.
True.
But if you can take your music and break it apart into stems and put it into a tool like Wise or FMOD Studio or Fabric or things like that, and deliver a full game audio middleware project ready to go, it's much less work for the game developer to get your audio and your music into the game. So it's less work for them. You've done more. You're doing something they're not doing and they don't know how to do. So they can't replace you with somebody that all they can do is compose music and put it in Dropbox. And if you go further and can literally write some simple C# code or Unreal Blueprint scripting to literally implement that into the game, you're that much less replaceable. And not only that, you're going to get a better product because now you're able to really do it yourself and finesse it just how you want it to sound.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah,
it's not a road. It's not a road for everybody.
Right.
But if you want to stand out and be a little bit more attractive to that sort of one-stop shopping place, it's a really good way to go.
I really like the idea of becoming less replaceable. That's a really good one-liner to make it so that people understand what they should kind of focus on if they're not at the top of their field already. So when people do want to kind of break into this game industry and want to come to something like Game SoundCon, why should they come there? What sorts of people should come there? What makes your conference so cool? I know, but maybe they don't.
You spoke last year.
Oh, yeah, it was awesome.
Like you. Well, we originally designed Game SoundCon. Again, this is our 10th year.
Yeah.
So I originally designed Game SoundCon. This is our 10th year. With my target audience were experienced composers and sound designers that really didn't know anything about games but wanted to see about getting into it. And so we had a single room that was, again, a sort of game audio 101 boot camp crash course over 2 days. We still have that. We have a set of sessions which are designed explicitly for people with maybe either have done no games at all, or maybe they've done a couple of indie games and all they've done is they've given some wave files of their music to somebody, to the game developer to put into the game. We expanded a couple of years ago, adding what we call the pro track. I think that was about 5 years ago we did that now. And that is the sort of what are the cutting edge games doing? And these sessions really assume that you're quite experienced in the industry. They're like GDC style sessions where here's a detailed post-mortem on the interactive music system in Connect Disneyland or something like that. And how did we approach the interactive horizontal and vertical resequencing of what was going on? So we have sessions that are specifically dedicated for that. So it's both for the experienced sound design, game sound person and also those sort of wishing to see what's going on. We also added a couple of years ago the VR track. Obviously, this is our 3rd year doing VR sessions. VR is kind of taking audio by storm for a whole swack of different reasons we could spend a whole another hour talking about. But it's a big enough paradigm shift that we've got, again, a whole room dedicated just to that. And then this year, I'm bringing in what I'm calling the academic and research tracks. And these are academic and research, either people who are studying game audio from sort of an academic perspective. Think of, how do game composers use leitmotifs to accentuate various things? Or also technological research that maybe it's not applicable to games right now because it's still pretty early, but maybe 10 years from now, this stuff might make it into games. We've got 3 or 4 sessions on machine learning and its musical composition systems based upon machine learning algorithms. Nice. So sort of wacky out there research that has applicability someday, potentially in video games. And so now it's become the idea is to get the people working on games, the composers and sound designers, and people studying games and doing research kind of into one big room and get them all drinking together and kind of see what happens.
Right. Right.
And then new this year, we just announced a couple of weeks ago, one thing that was missing from Game Sound Con was the vocal performance and dialogue, and that whole discipline of game audio, which is really quite amazing. Some of the things that they're doing. There's the game Spider-Man just came out, and even the trade press are noticing what they did with the dialogue. Yeah. The one thing that they're picking up on is when Peter Parker is just kind of walking around and not exerting himself and delivers a line of dialogue, it's one dialogue performance. But the exact same line of dialogue, if he's in the middle of a fight or he's in the middle of swinging between buildings, it's a much more breathless delivery of the same line of dialogue. And it just seamlessly switches. If in the middle of a line he starts fighting or starts swinging, it changes. And those are the sorts of things that, obviously people doing film don't even think about. Right. But that's kind of bread and butter, hopefully becomes bread and butter game audio. So those kind of 5 key tracks are the essence of Game Sound Con now. And then we also have Audio Kinetic coming in and giving a lot of the makers, the people who literally design and build the Wise engine, give some tutorials on that. We've also got Microsoft in showing some cool research that they're doing in automatically generating the acoustical propagation models you have in real or virtual environments. So it's kind of a big mix.
Yeah, so you've gotten it like pretty broad and deep, which is hard to do, but you've managed to actually pull it off. So when people come to something like Game Sound Con or any conference, what's your advice to them to make the most out of it?
To make the most out of it, if you're brand new to games, I do recommend that hitting the Essentials track is probably where you want to spend a decent amount of your time.
Sure.
We do videotape them, so we are. If you're a Game Sound Con attendee, you'll be able to access most of the talks that you didn't attend in person after the fact, usually about a couple months after the conference. That said, you do want to sort of plan out your day and look at what's most interesting, what's most applicable, and avoid the temptation to go to the sessions about stuff you know the most about. A lot of times you'll have the most interesting conversations or the most insights from seeing something that you know nothing about. If you're a composer, go to a sound design talk. Don't necessarily just go to just the music talks and write off the technical talk or the sound design talk or the machine learning, intro to machine learning talk. You may find some pretty cool stuff and get an appreciation for the different kinds of areas that go into game audio. You mentioned a moment ago that we're broad but deep.
Yeah.
I think that's just the way what game sound in general is, what game audio is it's this collection of people who are broad but deep.
Yeah, you managed to attract all of them, which is pretty cool. I'm a big fan of the types of people who show up. So as we kind of start to wrap this up, I'm curious, I have some like questions for you and about like what you've been thinking about the industry. So what's something that you'd like to actually see more out of the industry in general? Is like more of a certain type of game or a certain type of behavior or a certain type of like collaboration, some sort of like new spirit of collaboration? What are you looking to see more from the industry in general?
Okay. There are a couple of things on the business side that really need to be worked out. One of the biggies is if you are a composer for a game soundtrack and you own all the music outright, you licensed it to the game developer, YouTube won't let you register your music with Content ID because it's a video game soundtrack.
Right.
That to me is stunning in its badness.
It's very short-sighted.
Yeah, it's not even short-sighted. It's just there's a whole legal weird quagmire you can run down into. And the way they solved it was like, we're just not going to let you register music you own on YouTube system. So that and just generally bringing the laws and contract norms up to where the technology is. I think that's a big area I would like to see some people address. And some of us sort of have been behind the scenes kind of trying to address some of these things. And it's a slow slog, but that's certainly one. I still think VR is searching for that killer app. VR is it's an amazing change to our industry. It's great for game audio because even the graphics people are saying audio is important, which is really nice. But there are, again, still kind of looking for that total killer app that makes it a must-have ubiquitously for the masses and not just for the cool geeks. So those are a couple of the things I probably that come to mind in terms of changes I'd like to see in the industry.
Awesome. So as you kind of worked through this industry, now you've seen lots of change. You're a big arbiter of seeing where it's going to, considering you bring all these people together and get people talking. What was your, like, when you first started off, what were you thinking was like the success point for you, and how has that changed over the years? What was your definition of success as you started, and now what is it?
For me, the definition of success was, holy moly, I get to work on pinball machines for a living. It was like the day one of my job when I walked in, and literally the factory was right there. People were making pinball machines.
Awesome.
That I grew up loving. Probably when I feel like I was really doing well. When in the 90s, I had an extremely full plate. I was doing, a dozen to 20 what would be today considered AAA titles a year. Oof. Right? All the sounds in Madden, all the sounds in Desert Strike, which was EA's biggest selling game, I think, when it came out. It was on the top 10 list for 2 years or something like that. So things like that were pretty nice. Just sort of seeing it bloom from this sort of niche thing that a handful of us did to this big industry has been really, really fun to watch.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have like another mountain to climb, or are you good? Like, what are you kind of thinking is the next accomplishment for Brian Schmidt?
That's a good question. I enjoy teaching a ton. Yeah. Both my parents were music teachers. I think that's one of the reasons why I like doing Game Sound Con. It's kind of that teacher vibe. I teach part-time at DigiPen in the music and sound design department there. I still enjoy working on games. Again, I'm working on Mutant Football League now, which is, hits the store shelves on October 2nd, I think it is, for Switch, PlayStation, Xbox.
Awesome.
So I still love doing games. I don't think I'll ever stop loving doing that. As I get older, I turned 56 a couple days ago, so I do feel slow down a little bit. And I've definitely seen, obviously composers come in. And I think I'm a pretty good composer. I'm pretty decent, and seeing people who just are amazing composers is both inspiring and utterly humbling. There's a lot of game music that I hear. It's like, I could have written that. I could have written that. Yeah. And then I hear someone's like, oh my goodness, wow, how did do that?
Right.
I'm such a hack.
It's good to know that everybody has that thoughts from time to time, because I certainly do.
Well, this is really true. I mean, I am not a Gary Scheinman. I'm not an Austin Victory, and I have no qualms about it.
Right.
But it's awesome to work and be colleagues. Both of them have given time to me to speak at Game Sound Con or to partake in the Gang Scholars program and be mentors to, a 20-something-year-old that is just starting out and is so thankful that these people are taking the time to really sit down and give them heartfelt, honest, forthright advice. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the things I love most about the industry, is that the community of people we have seem to be far more people like that than less giving people.
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree. People seem to be very open and friendly in this industry, which is why I love it so much. That's my favorite part about it. That's my favorite part. Yeah.
My favorite part of Game Sound Con is getting all these awesome people in the room together, where you will just as easily find a rookie talking with an experienced composer about how hard the piano part is for into Myth Tuba Sonata, as you will, experienced veterans talking about some bizarre technical thingy.
Totally. Absolutely. So that's all my questions. So for the last one, where can people find out more about you and Game SoundCon?
To find more about me, my website is brianschmidtstudios.com. If you Google Brian Schmidt, chances are you will hit Brian Schmidt, who won the Nobel Prize in Physics a few years ago and destroyed my Google rankings. So no, I did not win the Nobel Prize in Astrophysicist to discover that the universe expansion was accelerating. That was a different guy. If you so go Google me, or for Game SoundCon, which is October 9th and 10th this year in LA, GameSoundCon.com has all the registration information. Almost all the speaker sessions are up right now. Got a couple more we're going to put on the website still, but I think we've got somewhere around 60 or something talks this year.
Nice.
By amazing people. Again, I'm always humbled by the people take their time out to give back and help educate the other folks that are out there.
Awesome. So do you have any parting words of wisdom for those people who are new to the industry before we wrap up?
Don't be shy and always be curious. Almost everybody I know in game audio has a pretty passionate curiosity about not just the music, but how everything fits together. You don't have to be a crazy gamer playing games 20 hours a week, but you do kind of have to be curious about how it works. And again, almost everybody I've seen who's very successful in the industry has that kind of drive in them to look under the hood and peek at some of these things.
Yeah, very true. Very true. So thank you so much, Brian. I think this was awesome, and thank you for all of your advice. I'm sure people will find out more about you in the description below as well. They can find out about Game SoundCon and register there. And also I'll put up your website and all that good stuff too, so people can find you and not the astrophysicist instead. So thanks so much, Brian. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. You should just click on him. He did some amazingly fascinating work in the studying of Type 1a supernova.
That's hilarious. All right, Brian, thank you so much.
Thank you.